In today's society, media bombards us with news on climate change. We are warned about single-use plastics and how they harm our oceans and our forever burning rainforest. But are we forgetting the most crucial aspect to human survival? Bees. For our YSI project, we took a closer look at bees.
How long have you been a beekeeper for?
This is my fourth summer now, so you could say it runs by seasons, but in general, yeah, I'm only a beginner.
Okay.
4 years in, there's people out there who are in it maybe 30, 40 years, retired people, and they will say that they are still learners. Every year is different, every time you learn something through mistakes.
And could you tell us what the life cycle of a bee would be like?
So there are mainly three different types of bees. Well, four. The main bee in the hive is the worker bee, and she's female. Now, we also classify bees into summer bees or winter bees. Summer bees, on average, last 3 to 4 weeks, and then they die. It takes them from day 1 to day, say, 20, 21. They're in the cell, in the hive, getting ready, pupating, developing into a bee, and then they emerge. And they'll last about 3-4 weeks. Winter bees will last longer because they need to last longer. They have to stay in the hive. They can't get out and forage for food themselves. So that's the worker bee. The drone bee, kind of the same life cycle, lasts for a month in the summer and then up to maybe 6 months for the winter months. And then the queen can last anything as long as she lives up to about 3 years, 3-4 years, even longer. Depends.
It's very interesting. So how long on average would it take for honey to come from the pollination stage to in the hive to on the shelves?
Okay, so depending on the person themselves, like the beekeeper and how active they are, at the beginning of the year, you will feed your bees a little bit of watery syrup just to get them kick-started until the flowers come into bloom. When the flowers start coming into bloom, then what happens is the bees will go out, they'll gather the pollen, they'll gather the nectar. They'll carry it in little pouches on their legs, they'll also carry it in their stomachs. They'll go back into the hive, they'll regurgitate it into the small cells, and in there that they will, little by little, filter out the nectar from the water vapour so that it becomes pure honey then. They'll fill up all the cells and then cover them up. And then it's only when they're covered that the beekeeper should be taking off the honey. So that can be from, usually the nectar season will start April-ish, and then it'll finish. You'll take your honey off the hive maybe August, September at the latest.
It's a global issue now that the bees are dying, and I was wondering if you know anything that our country, Ireland, is doing about it. Any organisations?
Well, there are multiple beekeeping organisations around the country. Every single county in this country has a beekeeping organisation, and some counties have 2 or multiple. So in Dublin, there's like North Fingal Beekeeping Association. In Dublin, there's the South. Same in Kildare, they have a North Kildare beekeepers and South Kildare. Each of those are doing their own little thing to try and preserve the honeybee. But in the more kind of national sense, things like Biodiversity Ireland, pollinators, they are working in hand with the government to develop schemes like GLOS scheme, which is basically they're giving farmers a grant to plant lots of natural flowers that bees can forage off, and then that will promote basically bee growth and bee health. However, there is the other side, that legislation around pesticides is not being changed with the science. So science is telling us now that pesticides are having an effect on a bee's capacity to find its way back to the hive if things have been sprayed. So if it's direct spraying, the bee could die immediately. But if the bee feeds on a plant that has been sprayed, it can affect the bee's capacity to make its way back to the hive safely. So that's ongoing, and if the government don't catch up with the science, and if the EU don't acknowledge things, that's going to be a rolling problem.
For young people and just local people in general, what can we do to help, prevent the extinction of the bees?
So there's 2 different, I suppose there's 2 roles you can think about here. Number 1, there's the beekeeping role, and that's the honeybee. There's only 1 species of honeybee. But in Ireland, there are up to 20 species of bumblebee. So you're all, used to seeing the little kind of furry bumblebee.
Yeah.
There's 20 different kinds of them in Ireland. And all across Europe, all the way to the edge of Russia, basically, you have the bumblebee species. But there's also another species of a solitary bee, up to 70 of those. So what's happening is that we need to start recognising where these bees live, the kind of habitat that they like, and we as people should try and replicate those habitats. So bee hotels, creating nice places for them, like embankments or clay banks. And then the other thing is, we can build a home, but we have to provide them with food. So can we build areas? Can we convert our grasses, our lawns into nice flower beds, flower gardens, especially the flowers that they can feed off? A bee can't feed off every single flower. It can only feed off certain ones that they know will give food back.
If all the world's bees died off, there would be major rippling effects through our ecosystems. 1/3 of the food we consume is pollinated by bees. In the past 3 months, 500 million bees have died due to wildfires. It's said that Einstein stated that we have approximately 4 years to live if all the bees became extinct.
Well, I think probably the first thing they can do is to grow a wide variety of flowers. Simple flowers, not very complex double flowers, but the simple, almost wild flowers, and grow them. And the other thing that's probably very important that people don't realise is that you grow flowers that, particularly in the spring and autumn, you try and have flowers to feed them at those times of the year, because that's when there are probably less flowers around generally in a garden, and it's the time they need a lot of food. They need a lot of food in spring to build up their nests, their numbers, to breed, and then they need a lot of nectar in the autumn to get them through the winter, so that they're okay when they emerge again in the spring and they're not starved. I think are wonderful. There's lots of lovely flowers. I mean, if you look at it, even in garden centres, you'll see signs on them saying bee friendly. It's very hard to think immediately of, you know, a list of flowers, but they're usually things like verbena, linaria, some roses. They love some wild roses, you know, or the wilder type of roses, not the very heavily bred sterile roses. I think people didn't realise that bumblebees need, you know, a little bit of wildness to survive. They need a little, somewhere in a corner in a garden or a wall, or we have one in a particular shed that during the summer we saw him coming in and out, or maybe it's a her, I don't know whether they're males or females, flying in and out all day just through a tiny little hole, and that was his individual nest.
So what do we need to know to help protect bees?
Don't spray, that's the most important thing. Don't use insecticides, you know, don't use anything that will damage them, because, you know, you will kill them. I mean, if the bees die out, probably other insects will die as well, because in fact, you know, it's never just a single species really, is it? In Australia, they actually have to, they import the bees to bring them into the greenhouses to pollinate the tomato plants, because they don't have, or they didn't have the right species of bee or bumblebee. And I think it behoves all of us to make an effort to maybe make life easy for them.
Thank you for watching, and ask yourself what you can do to encourage bees coming into your garden.